The Axiom device had never failed in 10,000 years of service to the Galactic Concordance, and Commander Velketh had no reason to believe today would be any different from the countless days before it. He stood tall on the observation platform above the arrival gate, his bioluminescent scales casting a soft blue glow across the metal walls of Station Terminus, and he watched the endless parade of refugees shuffle through the scanning array below. The Hollow War had displaced millions of beings from dozens of worlds, and they all came here seeking safety and classification, and a place in the great order of the Concordance. The Axiom device made that possible, for it was ancient beyond measure and wise beyond understanding, built by the forerunners who had vanished long before any current species drew breath. Every sapient being that stepped onto the scanning platform received a designation that would define their role in galactic society. Worker or soldier or scholar or predator or prey, the device saw into the very essence of each species and declared what they were meant to be. A hulking Vorten mercenary stepped onto the platform, his 4 arms crossed over his armored chest, and the device hummed with familiar energy. Golden light cascaded over his massive frame, and within seconds the classification appeared above his head in glowing letters that all could read. Soldier class, threat level 7, combat utility optimal. The Vorten grunted with satisfaction and moved along to receive his assignment. Next came a slender Myerthian with delicate wings folded against her back, and the device labeled her scholar class, threat level 2, research utility high. She bowed gracefully and drifted toward the academic quarters. Velketh had witnessed this process thousands upon thousands of times, and he found comfort in its perfect predictability. The universe made sense when everything had a label and a purpose, and a place in the grand design. His assistant, a nervous young Krellian named Tav with too many eyes and not enough confidence, approached with a data tablet clutched in his trembling appendages. "Commander, we have an unusual arrival incoming," Tav said, his voice carrying the slight buzz of his species. "Define unusual," Velketh replied without looking away from the processing floor. "A human vessel, sir, badly damaged and barely holding atmosphere according to our scans." Velketh finally turned, one scaled eyebrow rising with mild curiosity. "Human, from that backwater world discovered a few cycles ago." "Yes, Commander, Earth, they call it, though I cannot imagine why anyone would name a planet after dirt." "Survivors?" "Just one, sir, a juvenile female, approximately 12 cycles old by their species measurement." Velketh considered this information with the same detachment he applied to all arrivals. Humans were new to the galactic stage and utterly unremarkable by all accounts, short-lived creatures with fragile bodies, and a small territory on the far edge of explored space. The Concordance had not even bothered to establish formal relations with them yet. "Process her like any other refugee," Velketh ordered, already turning back to watch the floor below. "Scan, classify, assign. Nothing complicated about it." "Of course, Commander." The human vessel docked an hour later, and medical teams extracted the sole survivor from the wreckage with careful efficiency. Velketh observed through the security feeds as they brought her to the processing center, a small creature with dark hair and pale skin and eyes that seemed too large for her thin face. She clutched a worn stuffed animal against her chest, some kind of 4-legged beast that Velketh did not recognize, and she walked with the careful steps of someone who had learned not to trust the ground beneath her feet. Her name, according to the ship's damaged records, was Myra Chen. She had been traveling with her parents when something had attacked their vessel, though the logs were too corrupted to reveal what. The girl had survived alone in the drifting wreck for nearly a full cycle, rationing emergency supplies, and somehow keeping the life support systems functional long enough for a passing freighter to detect her distress signal. Velkith felt a flicker of something that might have been respect for the child's resilience, but he pushed it aside as irrelevant to his duties. Myra was brought to the scanning platform and guided to stand in the center of the array. She looked around at the towering aliens watching her from every direction, and Velkith expected to see terror in her young eyes. Instead, he saw only a quiet alertness, a careful observation of her surroundings that seemed oddly mature for one so young. "The device will scan you now," a processing attendant explained in the simplified trade language all species learned. "It will not hurt. Simply stand still and let it read your pattern." Myra nodded once and hugged her stuffed animal tighter. The Axiom device activated with its familiar hum, and brilliant light cascaded over the human girl's small frame. Velkith watched without particular interest, expecting the standard classification to appear within moments. Worker class perhaps, or maybe adaptable class given humanity's reputation for versatility. The device continued to hum, and the light intensified, and Velkith noticed that the scan was taking longer than usual. He leaned forward slightly, scales shifting to a deeper shade of blue that indicated his growing attention. The hum became a whine, and the whine became a sound that Velkith had never heard the device make in all his years of service, a discordant screech that made every being in the chamber flinch. The light flickered and strobed and pulsed in chaotic patterns, and the readout displays began to glitch with cascading errors. Then the classification appeared above Myra's head, blazing in crimson letters that Velkith had never seen the device produce before. "Do not classify reference, prime archive restricted threat assessment, null undefined recommend, immediate quarantine." Alarms exploded throughout the chamber with deafening urgency, and every official in the room froze in place, as if struck by a stasis field. Velkith stared at the crimson words with his mouth hanging open in a display of shock he would later find deeply embarrassing. The Axiom device had classified over 8 billion sapient species across the known galaxy, from the mightiest apex predators to the most insignificant microbial colonies. It had never, not once in 10,000 years of continuous operation, returned a result like this. "What is happening?" Tav squeaked from beside him, all of his eyes blinking in rapid asynchronous panic. Velkith did not answer because he had no answer to give. He watched as security teams surrounded the small human girl, their weapons drawn but uncertain, and he watched as Myra looked up at the crimson letters glowing above her head with an expression of innocent confusion. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked in her small voice, barely audible over the screaming alarms. Velkith finally found his voice and activated the command channel to address the chamber. "Secure the human in comfortable quarters. Isolation Protocol 7, not detention," he ordered with a steadiness he did not feel. "No one is to interact with her without my direct authorization, and someone silence those alarms before I start shooting the speakers myself." The alarms died, and the security teams gently escorted Myra away, and she went with them without resistance while still clutching her stuffed animal. Velkith stood motionless on his observation platform for a long time after she disappeared from view. He had served the Concordance for over 200 cycles, and he had believed that he understood how the universe worked. The device classified, the Concordance organized, and everything had its proper place. But now, a 12-year-old human girl had walked onto his station and shattered that certainty with nothing more than her presence. He needed answers, and there was only one source in all the galaxy that might have them. "Tav," he said quietly, "open a secure channel to the Prime Archive. I need to speak with Archon Selu immediately." His assistant made a sound of pure terror at the name. "The Archive AI. Commander, no one speaks to Selu directly. It only responds to the High Council, and only then under extraordinary circumstances." "Look at that readout and tell me these circumstances are not extraordinary," Velketh replied, gesturing at the crimson words still burning above the empty platform where Myra had stood. Tav looked, and Tav said nothing more, and within minutes the channel was open to the most ancient intelligence the Concordance had ever known. Something had begun on Station Terminus today, and Velketh could not shake the feeling that the galaxy itself was holding its breath. The Prime Archive existed in a place that was not quite a place, a vast digital realm constructed by the Forerunners before they vanished into the unknown reaches of the cosmos. Archon Selu served as its curator and guardian, an artificial intelligence so old that it remembered the birth of species that had long since gone extinct. Velketh had never spoken to it directly, and as the holographic projection flickered to life before him, he understood why so few beings ever sought this audience. Selu manifested as a shifting geometric form that hurt the eyes if one looked at it too long, angles that should not exist folding into shapes that defied comprehension. Commander Velketh of Station Terminus. The AI spoke in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. You have invoked the emergency protocols to contact this archive. State your purpose with precision. Velketh straightened his posture and forced his scales to maintain a calm blue rather than the anxious green they wanted to become. A human child arrived at my station today. The Axiom device failed to classify her and returned a result I have never seen in my 200 cycles of service. Describe this result. Do not classify, followed by references to restricted Prime Archive files and a recommendation for immediate quarantine. The threat assessment returned null, which should be impossible according to everything I understand about the device. Selu's geometric form pulsed with colors that had no names in any language Velketh knew. You have encountered a human, the AI said, and something in its ancient voice sounded almost like resignation. This was inevitable, though we had hoped for more time. More time for what? What are humans that the device cannot read them? The device can read them perfectly well. That is precisely the problem, Selu replied. It returns no classification because no classification exists that can contain what they are. Velketh felt his confusion deepening rather than clearing. Humans are weak, short-lived, fragile creatures from an unremarkable world. Our scouts assessed them as barely noteworthy when Earth was discovered. Your scouts saw what humans appear to be in this moment of their existence, but the Axiom device sees deeper. It perceives the full pattern of a species across time itself, their potential as well as their present reality. And what does it see when it looks at humans? Selu was silent for a long moment, and when the AI spoke again, its voice carried a weight of ages. It sees something that should not exist, a species with no ceiling, no final form, no endpoint to their evolution. They are not a finished creation but an ongoing process, and the device cannot classify a process that has no conclusion. Velketh struggled to comprehend what he was hearing. Every species evolves. That is the nature of biological life. Other species evolve toward a destination, whether they know it or not. The Vorten were always going to become warriors. The Myerthian were always going to become scholars. And every other species in the galaxy follows a path that leads to a final state of being, Selu explained. But humans have no such path. They simply become, endlessly, adapting to every challenge and every environment and every circumstance in ways that rewrite the fundamental rules of what they are. That sounds like a strength, not a reason for quarantine. It is both, Commander. The Forerunners studied humanity in secret for thousands of their cycles before they vanished, and what they learned frightened them enough to leave warnings throughout the archive. The AI's form shifted, and suddenly Velketh found himself looking at ancient text projected in the air, symbols he could not read, but that the translation matrix quickly converted to standard galactic script. By order of the builders, do not interact with species 7291, designation, human. Do not classify, do not awaken, maintain observation only until further notice. What does it mean to awaken them? Velketh asked. We do not know entirely. The Forerunners were not generous with explanations, Selu admitted, but we have fragments of their observations, recordings made during their long study of Earth. Another projection appeared, and this time Velketh saw images, primitive humans gathered around fires, building shelters, crafting tools from stone and bone. This was them 60,000 cycles ago, Selu narrated. Simple creatures barely surviving in a harsh world, no different from countless other primitive species across the galaxy. The images shifted forward in time, showing cities rising and falling, empires conquering and crumbling, technologies advancing with startling speed. And this was them just 3,000 cycles ago. They went from stone tools to splitting atoms in a span of time that most species would need 100 times longer to traverse. Impressive but not unprecedented, Velketh observed. Not unprecedented in achievement, but unprecedented in method, Selu corrected. Other species advance because circumstances force them to adapt. Humans advance because they cannot stop themselves, because the very nature of their consciousness compels them to reach beyond whatever limits they currently possess. The final projection showed the Forerunners themselves, tall, elegant beings of light and energy, standing before a massive display of calculations and models. This is the last recording we have of the Builders discussing humanity, Selu said. It was made shortly before they departed the galaxy forever. A Forerunner voice spoke, translated through layers of ancient code. They are not dangerous for what they are dangerous for what they become. They do not adapt to the galaxy adapts to them. Do not let them remember. Do not let them wake to their true nature. If they remember what they are becoming, nothing will stop them, and we are not certain if that is salvation or destruction. The projection faded, and Velketh stood in silence, processing everything he had heard. What did they mean by remember? He finally asked. We have theories but no certainties. Perhaps it refers to some dormant knowledge encoded in their genetics, or perhaps it speaks to a collective awakening of their species to their own unlimited potential, Selu replied. What we know is that the Forerunners, the most advanced civilization this galaxy has ever known, chose to leave rather than remain in a universe where humanity would eventually spread among the stars. But the child, Myra, she is just one small girl, traumatized and alone. How can she possibly represent a threat significant enough to justify such warnings? She does not represent a threat, Commander. She represents an uncertainty, and for beings like the Forerunners who could calculate the trajectory of civilizations across millions of cycles, uncertainty was more terrifying than any enemy they had ever faced. Before Velketh could respond, an alarm sounded through the station, different from the earlier classification alert, this one indicating an incoming fleet detection. Tav's voice crackled over the communication channel, with barely contained panic. Commander, we have multiple hyperspace signatures incoming, at least 200 vessels matching the configuration of Veth Dominion warships. Velketh's scales flushed deep crimson with alarm. The Dominion, what could they possibly want with a refugee station? I believe I know, Selu said quietly. The Veth worship the Forerunners as gods and have spent millennia searching for any trace of the Builders' plans. If they detected the anomalous classification result from the Axiom device, they will have recognized its significance immediately. They want the girl. They want what they believe the girl represents, a key to understanding why their gods departed, or perhaps a means to bring them back. Velketh was already moving toward the command center, his mind racing through defensive options and evacuation protocols. Can they take the station by force? With 200 warships against your 12 defensive platforms? Yes, Commander, they most certainly can. The question is not whether they can take the station, but what you are willing to sacrifice to prevent them from taking the human child." Velkuth thought of Myra's face, of the quiet confusion in her eyes as she asked if she had done something wrong, and he made his decision without hesitation. "Everything," he said. "I will sacrifice everything, because something tells me that child is more important than this station, more important than me, and perhaps more important than anything the galaxy has seen in 10,000 years." Selu's geometric form pulsed with something that might have been approval. "Then you understand more than the Forerunners ever did. Commander, perhaps that is why they left, and perhaps that is why you will not." The communication ended, and Velkuth ran toward whatever destiny awaited them all. Myra sat on the edge of a bed that was too large for her in a room that felt too empty despite all the strange furniture it contained. The quarters they had given her were comfortable enough, with soft lighting that changed colors based on her mood, and a food dispenser that tried its best to create things she might recognize. She had asked for a peanut butter sandwich, and the machine had produced something that looked almost right but tasted like cardboard mixed with something vaguely nutty. She ate it anyway because she had learned during her long days alone on the damaged ship that hunger cared nothing for taste. Her stuffed bear, Mr. Whiskers, named by her younger self who had not understood that bears did not have whiskers, sat propped against the pillow, watching her with button eyes that had seen better days. "I do not think we are in trouble," she told the bear quietly. "They seem scared but not angry. There is a difference, you know." Mr. Whiskers offered no opinion, which Myra appreciated because she was not entirely certain of her own assessment. The tall alien with the glowing scales, the one the others called Commander, had looked at her with an expression she recognized from her father's face whenever something at his research facility had gone unexpectedly wrong. Not disappointment or blame, just that particular flavor of concern that meant grown-ups were dealing with something they did not fully understand. The door chimed softly, and a moment later the Commander himself entered, his scales shifting from blue to a warmer shade of purple as he saw her sitting there. "Myra Chen," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle for someone who commanded an entire station. "My name is Velkuth. I apologize that we have not been properly introduced until now." "Are you going to tell me what is happening?" Myra asked. "Everyone keeps looking at me like I am going to explode." Velkuth made a sound that might have been a laugh if his species had laughed in the same way humans did. "You are not going to explode. At least, I hope not. But I will be honest with you because I think you deserve honesty even if I do not fully understand what to tell you." He sat down in a chair that was definitely not designed for his anatomy, and Myra found something almost funny about watching him try to arrange his long limbs comfortably. "Our scanning device, the thing that made all those lights, is very old and very wise," Velkuth explained. "It looks at people and tells us what kind of people they are, what jobs they might be good at, how to help them find their place in our society." "Like a career counselor?" Myra asked, remembering the woman who had visited her school once to talk about future jobs. "Something like that, yes. But when it looked at you, it could not decide what you are, and that has never happened before in all the time anyone can remember." Myra considered this information with the same careful thoughtfulness she had applied to rationing her emergency supplies on the ship. "Maybe it is broken. We checked, it is working perfectly, which means the problem is not with the device, but with what it is trying to understand." "So I am the problem." "You are the mystery," Velkuth corrected gently, "and some people find mysteries frightening, while others find them exciting. I am trying very hard to be in the second group." Myra nodded slowly, then looked at him with those two large eyes that seemed to see more than they should. "You are not telling me everything. There are ships coming, are they not? I heard the alarms change, and the people outside my door started talking faster." Velkuth's scales flickered with surprise. You heard them through the door. No, but I felt the vibrations change in the floor. When people walk fast and nervous, they step differently than when they walk normal. My dad taught me that when I was little because he said paying attention to small things helps you understand big things. The commander stared at her for a long moment, and Myra saw something shift in his expression. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was a scientist. He studied how things connect to other things, how one small change can affect everything around it, Myra said, and her voice stayed steady even though talking about her parents still hurt somewhere deep in her chest. He said humans are good at seeing patterns that other people miss. I am beginning to understand that, Velketh replied quietly. Over the next several hours, Velketh found himself returning to Myra's quarters again and again between his efforts to prepare the station's defenses against the incoming fleet. Each time he visited, he brought small problems, puzzles that had been plaguing his staff, questions about logistics and resource allocation, even an ancient riddle that the station's scholar caste had debated for decades without resolution. Myra solved them all. Not with great fanfare or obvious genius, but with the same quiet thoughtfulness she applied to everything, turning the problems over in her mind, asking questions that seemed simple but revealed hidden assumptions, and then offering answers that felt obvious only after she spoke them. The water recycling system is not broken, she told the engineering team through a video link Velketh had set up. It is working exactly as designed, but whoever designed it assumed people would only drink when they were thirsty. Your refugees drink for comfort because they are scared, so you need to account for emotional consumption, not just biological need. The chief engineer, a grizzled old Meloran who had been working the systems for 50 cycles, stared at the screen with his mouth hanging open. She is 12, he said to Velketh in disbelief. How does a 12-cycle human see what I could not? Velketh had no answer. The most unsettling moment came in the medical bay, where Myra had wandered during a brief period when her guards were distracted by a false alarm. Velketh found her sitting beside a dying Krethian warrior, one of the refugees who had arrived with wounds too severe for the station's limited medical facilities to heal. The Krethian were a proud species with complex death rituals, and their priests were all either dead or scattered across the war-torn galaxy. Myra was holding the warrior's massive clawed hand and humming softly, a melody that made Velketh's scales stand on end because he recognized it. That is the Krethian death song, he whispered to the attending physician. How does she know that? It is never shared with outsiders, their priests guard it as sacred. The physician could only shake her head in bewilderment. When the warrior finally passed, his eyes closed and his features peaceful in a way that should have been impossible without the proper rites, Myra simply stood and walked back to Velketh with tears on her cheeks. I do not know how I knew, she said before he could ask. It was like the song was already inside me, waiting for someone who needed to hear it. Does that make sense? No, Velketh admitted. But I am starting to think that making sense is not as important as I always believed. He took her back to her quarters and sat with her while she cried, not for the Krethian warrior she had never met, but for her parents whom she would never see again, and for herself, lost in a universe that seemed to want something from her that she could not understand. When her tears finally stopped, she looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. The ships that are coming, they want me, do they not? Yes. Will you give me to them? No. Even if fighting them means people will die. Velketh considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. When my people were young, we had a saying, the commander who sacrifices one innocent to save 100 has saved no one, because he has taught the universe that innocents are acceptable losses. I do not know what you are, Myra Chen, but I know you are innocent, and I will not trade your life for easy safety. Myra was quiet for a long time, and when she spoke again, Her voice carried a weight that seemed too heavy for someone her age. "Then I need to help. I do not know how yet, but I will find a way, because you are protecting me, and that means I owe you something in return." "You owe me nothing." "I know," she said with a small smile that reminded Velkith painfully of his own daughter, lost to the wars long ago. "That is why I want to help, because I do not have to, which makes it mean something." In that moment, watching a human child speak words wiser than most philosophers he had known, Velkith finally began to understand what the Forerunners had feared. It was not humanity's potential for destruction that had driven them away. It was their potential for everything else. The Veth Dominion fleet emerged from hyperspace like a swarm of metal predators, 200 warships arranged in perfect formation around a command vessel, so massive it seemed to dwarf the stars themselves. Velkith stood in the command center of Station Terminus, watching the tactical display fill with red icons that represented enough firepower to reduce his station to scattered atoms 1,000 times over. "They are hailing us, Commander," Tav reported, his voice barely steady enough to be understood. "Put them through." The main view screen flickered, and Velkith found himself facing Hierarch Koth the Unbroken, supreme leader of the Veth Dominion, and the most feared warlord in the outer sectors. Koth was enormous even by the standards of his species, a towering mass of armored plates and cybernetic enhancement that had been accumulated over centuries of conquest. His eyes burned with religious fervor, and his voice carried the absolute certainty of someone who had never once questioned whether he might be wrong. "Commander of Station Terminus," Koth began without preamble, "you harbor a human child who triggered an anomalous response in the sacred Axiom device. This child is now property of the Veth Dominion by divine right, and you will surrender her immediately or face the consequences of defying the will of the Forerunners." Velkith felt his scales flush with anger, but he kept his voice calm. "The child is a refugee under the protection of the Galactic Concordance. She is not property, and she is certainly not yours to claim. The Concordance has no authority in matters of sacred significance. The Forerunners left the Axiom device as a gift to guide the faithful, and any being it marks with special designation belongs to those who serve the Builder's true purpose. The designation was do not classify, not property of KOTH," Velkith replied, "and I find it interesting that you interpret every ancient artifact as belonging to you regardless of what it actually says." Koth's eyes narrowed, and his massive hands clenched into fists that could crush starship hulls. "You mock the sacred. You dare speak to me with such disrespect while your pathetic station floats defenseless before my fleet. I speak to you as one commander to another. My station may be small, but my spine is not, and I will not hand over an innocent child to someone who treats people like objects." "Then you will die, and we will take her anyway. You have one standard hour to reconsider before I give the order to open fire." The transmission ended, and the command center fell silent except for the soft hum of equipment and the rapid breathing of terrified crew members. "Begin evacuation procedures for all non-essential personnel," Velkith ordered, his voice steady despite the cold certainty growing in his chest. "Anyone who wishes to leave should be given transport to the nearest safe system. Those who wish to stay and fight may do so, but I will not order anyone to die for this cause." "Commander," his tactical officer spoke up hesitantly, "even with full defensive capabilities, we cannot survive an assault from that fleet. Our shields will last perhaps 15 minutes against concentrated fire." "I know." "Then why? Why sacrifice everything for one human child?" Velkith turned to face his crew, 53 beings of various species who had served with him through countless challenges, who trusted him to make decisions that would keep them alive. "Because some things matter more than survival," he said quietly, "and because if we give them what they want today, we teach them that taking is easier than asking. Next time it will not be a child they demand, but a world or a species, or the freedom of everyone who ever hoped the Concordance stood for something real. The tactical officer nodded slowly, and Velkith saw something shift in her eyes, fear giving way to resolution. 15 minutes it is then. I will make every second count. The hour passed faster than Velkith had expected, filled with frantic preparations and tearful farewells as shuttles carried away those who had chosen to flee. When the deadline arrived, only a skeleton crew remained, 31 volunteers who had decided that some battles were worth fighting even without hope of victory. Myra appeared in the command center, just as Koth's fleet began powering weapons. She had slipped away from her guards somehow, and she walked through the chaos with a calm that seemed impossible for someone her age. "I need to talk to him," she said to Velkith, pointing at the view screen where Koth's ship loomed like a metal mountain. "Absolutely not. This is not a situation for a child." "This is exactly a situation for me because I am the reason it is happening," Myra replied with quiet firmness. "You are willing to die to protect me, so the least I can do is try to talk to the person you are dying against." "Myra, he is not a person you can reason with. He is a fanatic who believes the universe owes him everything." "I know, I can see it in his eyes even through the screen," she said. "But fanatics are just people who are very afraid of something, and sometimes talking to the fear works better than fighting the person." Velkith wanted to argue, wanted to send her back to safety, but something in her expression stopped him. It was not the face of a frightened child asking permission. It was the face of someone who had seen something he could not see, and was asking him to trust what she knew. "Open a channel," he heard himself say. Koth's face appeared on the screen again, his expression twisted with anticipation of the slaughter to come. "Have you reconsidered, Commander? Will you save your pathetic crew by surrendering the human?" "I have not," Velkith replied, "but someone else wishes to speak with you." He stepped aside, and Myra walked forward until she stood directly before the massive view screen, a tiny figure facing a mountain of armored rays. Koth stared at her with something between contempt and curiosity. "So this is the anomaly, this small, fragile creature that the sacred device could not classify. I expected something more impressive." "I am sorry to disappoint you," Myra said, and her voice carried clearly through the speakers without a trace of fear. "But I think you are already disappointed, are you not? You have spent your whole life looking for signs from the Forerunners, waiting for them to tell you that you are special, that your faith has meaning. And now you find out that something exists that even their great device cannot explain, and it is not you." Koth's eyes widened, and Velkith saw something he had never expected to see on that brutal face, surprise, and beneath it, a flicker of uncertainty. "You know nothing of my faith, human. I know that faith means trusting in something larger than yourself, and I know that you do not really trust anything. You obey because obedience gives you power, and you worship because worship gives you control, but deep down you are terrified that the Forerunners left because they saw something coming that even they could not stop." "Silence. You think it was us, do you not?" Myra continued, undeterred by his rage. "You think humans are the reason the Forerunners disappeared, and you think if you can control me, you can control whatever scared them away. But you are wrong." She took a step closer to the screen, and somehow that small movement seemed to fill the entire command center with her presence. The Forerunners were not afraid of what humans could do to them. They were afraid of what we would do for everyone else. They knew that if we ever really woke up, if we ever remembered what we are capable of becoming, we would not conquer anyone. We would make everyone stronger, and empires like yours only survive when others stay weak. The silence stretched across the void between the station and the fleet. Koth stared at the small human girl with an expression Velkith could not read, and for a long, terrible moment, no one moved and no one spoke. Then the hierarch did something that made every officer in both command centers question their own sanity. He lowered his gaze. "Withdraw the fleet," he said quietly to someone off-screen. "Hierarch." I said withdraw now, we are leaving this system. The transmission ended, and on the tactical display, 200 warships began to turn away from station terminus. Velkith stood in stunned silence as the fleet that should have destroyed them retreated into hyperspace, disappearing one by one until only empty stars remained. He looked at Myra, who was trembling slightly now that the moment had passed, the weight of what she had done finally settling onto her young shoulders. "How?" he whispered. "I do not know," she admitted. "I just looked at him and saw what he was afraid of, and I told him the truth about it. Sometimes that is enough." She swayed slightly, and Velkith caught her before she could fall, lifting her small body in his arms as exhaustion finally claimed her. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "it is more than enough." The Galactic Concordance Council convened 3 days after the Veth Dominion fleet withdrew, gathering in their great chamber on the capital world to decide the fate of one small human girl. Velkith stood before them as her advocate, facing 12 of the most powerful beings in known space, each representing species that had shaped galactic civilization for millennia. "She is dangerous," declared Councillor Vreth of the militant faction, his voice echoing through the vast hall. "Whatever power she possesses drove away an entire Dominion fleet without a single shot fired. Such ability cannot be left uncontrolled." "She is a child," Velkith countered, "and she did nothing but speak honestly to a frightened tyrant. If truth is now considered a weapon, then this council has fallen further than I feared." "Do not lecture us on morality, Commander," Councillor Senna of the Economic Union replied coolly. "We have reports from your own staff describing impossible things. A 12-cycle human solving problems that stumped our best scholars, knowing sacred songs she should never have heard, reading people with accuracy that borders on telepathy. None of those things are crimes." "No, but they are warnings. The Forerunners themselves left instructions to quarantine humanity, to keep them isolated and unaware of their potential," Senna continued. "Are we so arrogant as to dismiss the wisdom of the builders?" "The Forerunners are gone," Velkith said firmly. "They abandoned this galaxy without explanation and left us to figure things out on our own. Their warnings are 10,000 years old, and perhaps it is time we stopped blindly following the instructions of people who are not here to explain themselves." The council chamber erupted in arguments, voices rising and falling in a dozen languages as representatives shouted their positions and their fears. Through it all, Myra sat quietly in a chair that had been provided for her, Mr. Whiskers clutched against her chest, watching the chaos with eyes that seemed older than her 12 years. Velkith noticed that she was not frightened, only thoughtful, as if she was working through a puzzle in her mind. The arguments were interrupted by a sudden pulse of light from the chamber's ancient communication array, technology so old that no one remembered who had installed it or why. Every screen in the room flickered, and the familiar geometric form of Archon Selu appeared before the assembled council. "Forgive my interruption," the AI said in its voice of ages, "but there is something the council must see before making any decision regarding the human child." "Selu, you have not addressed the council directly in over 2,000 cycles," the senior counselor said with obvious surprise. "What could possibly warrant such intervention?" "A file has unlocked in the Prime Archive, one that was sealed by the Forerunners themselves, with instructions that it should only be released when a specific condition was met." "What condition?" "When a human triggered the Do Not Classify response from the Axiom device, while displaying the pattern recognition abilities that Myra Chen has demonstrated," Selu replied. "The builders anticipated this moment, and they left a message, not for the council, but for humanity itself." The chamber fell absolutely silent. "However," the AI continued, I believe the Council should witness this message as well, so that you may understand what you are truly dealing with. Another pulse of light, and the holographic projectors activated to show something that made Velkith's breath catch in his throat. A forerunner stood before them, not a recording but something more, a presence that seemed to exist outside of time itself. The being was beautiful in a way that defied description, composed of light and energy, and something that felt almost like music given form. When it spoke, its voice resonated in a way that bypassed ears entirely and went straight to the understanding. Children of Earth, if you are hearing this message, then one of your kind has finally begun to remember what you are. Myra stood up slowly from her chair, her eyes wide, and Velkith saw tears forming even though her expression remained calm. We watched you from your first fire to your first dream of stars. We saw every war you fought and every peace you made, every cruelty you inflicted and every kindness you offered, every failure that broke you and every triumph that lifted you up again. The Forerunner's form shifted, showing images within itself, humans throughout their history, struggling and suffering and somehow always finding reasons to continue. Other species reach a final form and then stagnate. The Krellian perfected efficiency, the Myerthian perfected knowledge, the Sithrani perfected order. But you perfected nothing because you were always reaching for everything. We tried to predict what you would become and we failed. Our models showed you destroying yourselves and you survived. Our calculations showed you conquering the weak, and instead you lifted them up. Our projections showed you fearing the different, and instead you sought to understand it. Every time we believed we understood your limits, you exceeded them. Every time we thought we knew your nature, you changed it. The Forerunner's form pulsed with something that felt almost like emotion. We left because we knew we could not stop what you would become, not because we feared your destruction, but because we feared our own inability to accept your transformation of everything we had built. You are not dangerous because you are strong, you are dangerous because you make others strong. You do not conquer worlds, you befriend them. You do not hoard knowledge, you share it. You do not build empires, you build bridges. And we, who had spent millions of cycles perfecting our dominion over the galaxy, could not bear to watch you give away freely what we had hoarded so jealously. The Forerunner looked directly at Myra, and the connection between them was almost visible, a thread of light stretching across the chamber. Child of Earth, you are the first of your kind to truly wake, to see the patterns that connect all living things and to speak directly to the hearts of those who fear. But you will not be the last. Your species is unfinished because you were never meant to have a final form. You are the galaxy's immune system, its healing response, its endless capacity for hope in the face of despair. We did not know if that was salvation or destruction, and we were too afraid to stay and find out. But we believe now that we were wrong to leave, and we hope that this message finds you in time to undo some of the damage our cowardice has caused. Build well, children of Earth. Build bridges where we built walls. Build friendships where we built hierarchies. Build futures where we only saw endings. And when you have finished transforming this galaxy into something better than we ever imagined, perhaps, if you are willing, come find us in the dark between galaxies and show us how to change. The projection faded, and the chamber remained silent for a long, long time. Finally, Myra spoke, her voice small but steady in the vast hall. I would like to go home now, to Earth. There is a lot of work to do, and I think it should start where we began. The senior counselor looked at her with an expression that mixed fear and wonder, and something that might have been hope. You would leave. After everything you have shown you can do, you would return to a primitive world instead of staying here where you could reshape civilizations. Myra smiled, and in that smile Velkith saw echoes of every kind teacher, every patient parent, every gentle soul who had ever helped someone learn to be better. Reshaping civilizations is not my job. That is something everyone has to do together, she said. "My job is just to help people remember that they can, starting with the people I came from." She walked over to Velkith and looked up at him with those two large eyes that had seen into the heart of a warlord and found the fear beneath the armor. "Thank you for protecting me when you did not have to. When I come back someday, and I will come back, I hope we can be friends." "We already are," Velkith said, and he meant it with every scale on his body. 3 weeks later, a small ship departed from Station Terminus carrying Myra Chen back to Earth, back to a world that had no idea what its children would someday become. Velkith watched until the ship vanished into the stars. And then he turned back to his duties, with a feeling he had not experienced in centuries. Hope. The galaxy was vast and old and full of beings who had forgotten that change was possible. But somewhere out there, a 12-year-old girl was carrying a spark that would eventually set everything ablaze with light. And for the first time in 10,000 years, the future felt less like an ending and more like a beginning.